Hello, welcome to the third video in this series, Introduction to JavaScript. In today's episode, we are pretty much going to write our very first JavaScript program, and we are going to learn a concept in programming known as variables. Right. Without further ado, I'm going to get started by creating a new folder. I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call this folder Intro to JS. And then I'm going to proceed by opening up this folder in the code editor. Now, I want you to understand something, right? For the entirety of this course, Introduction to JS, all the different concepts we learn about will be created as files in here, right? And I'm going to create our very first JavaScript file, and I'm going to call this variable.js. I also want you to understand that every JavaScript file should always end with the extension .js because this is a way for our code editor or whatever tool that is going to execute this file to understand that this is a JavaScript file, so they can use the appropriate program to interpret the contents of this file. All right. So moving on, I'm going to try to explain what a variable is. All right. And a variable is a symbolic name that is associated with a value, right? And this value in question can be referenced and it can be manipulated throughout the entire course of the program, of a computer program, really. To make it much simpler, I want you to picture a scenario where you just got a pet, all right? And you have to give your pet a name, obviously, right? And say you give it a name like Jack, all right? It means every time your friends show up, would definitely reference your pet as Jack. Excuse me. And there would also be instances where you call your pet Jack and a certain thing happens. Say if it was a pet dog, for instance, you could call Jack and it could start wagging its tail and stuff like that, right? So that's the whole concept behind variables, right? And in JavaScript, there are three ways we can create variables, and those ways are using the keywords var, let, and const, right? And using either of these keywords, right, the program is going to exhibit similar and sometimes different characteristics, right, depending on how we write our codes. I'm going to start off by explaining or creating our first variable using the var keyword. And I want you to know that the var keyword is the oldest ways of declaring variables in JavaScript. In fact, it's not supported that much anymore, to be honest, right? But moving on, I'm just going to create a variable here and I'm going to call this first name and I'm going to point it to Stephen. I'm also going to create a variable called lucky number, sorry, and I'm going to assign this a value of 7, right? And as you can see here, value of first name is pointing to a word or a name, Stephen. And the value of lucky number here is pointing to a value of 7. So what this means is in the entirety of this file, whenever we try to get value of first name, we should always get Stephen, all right? And whenever we try to get the value of lucky number, we should always get 7, right? To put this in action, I'm just going to try to print out the value of first name and then print out the value of lucky number, all right? Now, I'm going to execute this file, variable.js, in the CLI. This is the CLI, or the terminal for short, the terminal rather, right? And what this is going to do is when we run this file, we should get first name and lucky name printed out to the console. So we should get Steven and we should get the number 7 printed out to the console. So if we do node variable.js, we get Steven printed out and we get 7 printed out, right? And earlier I mentioned that variables can be reassigned. So let's say let's say a few moments down the line, we decide to change our mind and we say we don't want first name to be Stephen anymore. We want it to be John, for instance. Or we don't want lucky number to be 7 anymore. We want it to be 14, for instance. Or let's say even 18, right? What that means is if we rerun this program, the values for first name and lucky number gets reassigned, right? And as you can see here, we got John and we got 18. Initially, they were assigned the value Stephen and 7, but we reassigned them John and 18. So when we ran the program, we got the value John and 18. And earlier, I also mentioned that depending on the keyword we use, this will try to exhibit different characteristics. And to make things clear, if we try to do first name here, like so, right? What this means is um we've declared a variable in a way we've actually declared a variable first name, right? But we didn't initialize it up until this line. So if we try to run this program, it still works, right? And in a way, right, that is a problem, right? Because we didn't actually assign first name or a value until line 4, right? So ideally, this should error out. But because we are using the var keyword, well, this behavior flies, right? So this is known as hoisting, right? And we'll explain this in a different section, right? But this behavior is known as hoisting, right? We declared a variable up top here, but we didn't initialize it or assign a value to it up until the next line, right? So what this does is JavaScript assigns this guy a value of undefined at first. If we try to do a console.log at this point for first name, we should get undefined. So if we run this, we do get undefined, and then we eventually get John and 18, right? So that is one of the behaviors we get when we use the keyword var to declare our variables. And this is a little bit of, and this is not the only behavior we get for using var to declare our variables. I'm going to try to clear this out, and I'm going to try something else. Another very finicky behavior the var keyword does is we could rewrite the same line and give it a value of John. We could rewrite the same line and give it a value of Sarah, right? Ideally, this should not be possible again, right? But because we are using the var keyword, this flies. So if we try to console.log the value of first name, we get the keyword Sarah. So in an ideal situation, this shouldn't work, right? But because we are using the var keyword, right, we can pretty much redeclare first name as many times as we want, right? And this is not one of the best ways to code, right? So I'm just gonna stick with um these two examples, var first name and let's say lucky number of 14. And this is how we declare variables using var. Now moving on to the let keyword, right? The let keyword is a much better way of declaring variables, and this was introduced in ES, I think let's say ES 2015. Yeah, let was introduced in ES 2015. And this is a much better way or a much cleaner way of declaring variables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable called surname, and I'm going to call this David, right? I'm also going to create a new variable called even number, and I'm just going to give it this a value of 2, right? So what we've just done is we've created a couple of new variables using the let keyword, right? If I do a console.log here, surname, and sorry, let's just do console.log surname and console.log even number, right? We should get David and 2, right? So I'm going to get rid of this initial console.log and I'm going to run this guy. So as you can see, we get the keyword David and Sue. So you're probably wondering, what's the difference between using the var keyword and the let keyword? So this is the difference really. If you remember in the var situation, we could pretty much reassign first name like so and just call it David, right? Or let's say call it, sorry, or let's say we call it Francis, right? And this would still work. But using the let keyword, this wouldn't work. So if we try to do surname equal, let's say, John, we already get an error, right? We already get a warning telling us that we cannot redeclare block scoped variable surname, right? And this is a much nicer way of programming, right? Because we define our variable once, right? And then we can reassign it a separate value later. So we definitely can already declare surname in the entirety of this program, and which is a very, very nice way of writing codes, right? So that is one of the that's one of the differences you get from using the let keyword. Another difference you get is if we try to do surname like so, and we try to give it a value of John, right? If we try to run this program, it errors out, right? And it tells us we cannot access surname before initialization. If we were using the var keyword, again, this would fly, right? This would definitely fly because JavaScript would initialize that variable with undefined. But if we're using the let keyword, JavaScript won't let us, right? And it tells us that we need to initialize surname first before we can start using it, which is again a much better way of writing codes, right? And if you are wondering if we can reassign, the values of these variables, surname and even number, yes, we can. But if we are going to reassign them, we are pretty much just going to write surname and just give it a new name like John. And we could say even number is now 4. And if we run this, it works. So we get John as the surname and we get even number as 4, right? Which again is a much nicer way to code. We declare this once and we can reassign it and use it everywhere else in this file. So I'm going to clear the terminal here, and we are going to talk about the last concept or the last approach to working with variables. So this is also a keyword that was introduced in EX 2015, and this is const. So we could say const middle name. Let's do an underscore here equal Francis, for instance, right? And we could say const odd number is 3, right? So what this does for us is this, right? We've declared two new variables using the const keyword. And what this means is we cannot reassign these variables anywhere else in this code, right? So if we try to print out the value of const middle name and we try to print out the value of const odd number, we should get Francis and 3. So if we run that, we do get, sorry, let me close out this guy so it's much cleaner. So if we run that, we end up getting Francis and 3, right? Now, we've just written another set of variables using the const keyword, right? To make this very interesting, if I try to do a middle name and I try to reassign this to be Marv, for instance, and I try to change the value of odd number to be 5, for instance, if we run this guy, it errors out. It tells us assignment to constant variable. And that's because when we use the const keyword, right, we cannot reassign the values of middle name or odd number anymore, right? So this becomes a constant, right? So it means middle name would always point to Francis in the entirety of this code. right? And odd number would always point to 3 in the entirety of this code. However, there are instances where the value of middle name and odd number could change, right? But that would be in a different tutorial called scopes, right? I'm going to explain that in a different tutorial called scopes because that's pretty much what it has, right? So I want you to know that when we define a variable with a const keyword, it becomes a constant and we can't change it, right? We also can't initialize um, middle name before. We can't initialize middle name here. We can't declare middle name here without initializing it first, right? So if we try to do Maverick here and we try to run this, we get an error. And this is the same error we got as using the let keyword, cannot access middle name before initialization. So what this means is we can't just start throwing the word middle name around, right? Without initializing it first, right? And yeah, that's pretty much variables in JavaScript. And we just wrote our first JavaScript program too. So see you in the next video. In the next video, we're going to cover a concept known as data types. And yeah, see you in the next one.